So it's kind of like we know it's going to be bad, we just don't know quite how bad or how fast it's going to get. So abrupt change in tipping points. It's about tipping points. And I'll rush on. Rush through this because we haven't got time. So that's it. Now, so when we hear about 2 degrees, you know, that's the thing you might have heard from Copenhagen. The world decided they'd try to keep within 2 degrees. That's what the whole British Climate Act and everything else is based on, to keep the temperature at 2 degrees. Well, we've already seen that actually that's based on the idea that 4:40 p.m. gives 2 degrees. But we've seen before that actually 4:40 p.m. gives a lot more. It gives ultimately, in the long term at least, 5 degrees. So that's nonsense anyway. But this is from Kevin Anderson. That is just saying that in 2001, how bad the impact of 2 degrees in terms of impact. In 2009, the estimate's just gone a lot more serious, but that's a different thing. He says, and you need to read his study, you can see it's on our website and many other places, but basically he's saying something different, and I'll cut it short a bit. But basically he's saying it's all a statistical con. The thing is, he's accepting the science that I've just said is not really true, but even accepting that science, the statistics that the projections are based on is rubbish for a number of reasons. And he goes into a much more detail than I'll be able to do. But he says, the current immediate rate of emissions are relatively low. They're based on past emission rates, not what we're emitting now. So emission rates have gone like that. And the projections are based on somewhere around here, but we've gone up there. And you can see how much. 2.7 in the last 100 years, it's gone up to 3.5, you know, and even more. So in other words, there are all sorts of slates of hand that have gone into, when you hear about 80% by 2050 in the climate bill and so on and so forth, that's all fudged statistics, and basically it's a con. I mean, you know, you have to take my word for it, but if you don't believe me, please don't believe me, then do see Kevin Anderson's hour-long sort of PowerPoint and talk. And the other thing is about where it peaks, and we have unrealistic assumptions about where it's going to peak. And you may have seen this sort of diagram before, but it means that if we peak late, then we have to reduce really fast, you know, ridiculously fast. The earlier we peak, the safer, you know, we have a slightly easier curve that we're aiming for to keep below. And of course, he also says 80% by 2050 means nothing, because it's cumulative emissions, it's how much we put up there. So if the graph looked like this, then all that area under the graph represents how much CO2 we put in the atmosphere. So the fact that we've got 80% by 2050 means nothing. So it's much more important what we do immediately. So that the graph looks like that, then there's only sort of that much that we're actually putting in the atmosphere. So the whole business about so many percent by such and such a year really means nothing. It's how fast we do it. So he explains this, and then he says that we're completely out. Everybody completely fudges. All the models assume that developing worlds will peak before 2017, China and India. And realistically, you know, if you ask anybody who actually lives there, 230 is very optimistic for them to peak. And yet, all the models and everything you read about, and these, you know, the assumptions, that's just these kind of orthodox view type assumptions like this. It's possible to predict to do 2 degrees C or less with at least a 50% probability. This is all bullshit, basically. This is what Kevin Anderson is saying. The 2 degrees, the UK cut emissions by at least 80% by 2050. The good news is that reductions of that size are possible without sacrificing the benefits of economic growth and rising prosperity. Hear that kind of thing all the time. And actually he's saying it's difficult to envisage anything other than a planned economic recession being compatible with stabilisation, etc. And that, the point about that, and he says some other pretty bad, scary things, is that that's even not it taken into, that's on the basis of conventional science. That's ignoring everything that we just saw before from Wasdell and Hansen and everybody else. That's just looking at the statistics. So, I'm saying it's not just a serious threat to our future that we can avert if we take the right action. That's what we've all been led to believe and worked on. It's not. It's happening now, causing suffering and death now. We've almost certainly condemned to death a much greater number in the future. However, however bad it seems, it could still get worse, because the ultimate case, bad case scenario, and there's some questions, I can't answer that, but the worst case scenario that some scientists say is a sort of death of all life on the planet. So, there's always something worth fighting for, however depressing it is. So it's kind of like, it's as if we're already in a state of war, as it were, against ongoing climate change, and we're trying to limit the unavoidable casualties. That's really where we are. You'd never think that, would you, if you see a news report or anything like that? But that's really where we are. I'm arguing, if you look at this real state of the science, that's where we are. However, there's a huge amount we're not doing that we could do, and it's really important to say that, because we should get on and do what we can do and not just gaze into the headlights, which of course it's very easy to do. So what am I saying? That's something that Kevin Anderson says, how easy it would be to reduce emissions from cars without even changing the technology if you try. Now what I'm saying here is, if you look at this as a real emergency, as it is, how do you deal with a real emergency? Well, Stern, in his report on climate change, often quoted, said that we could reach the targets established by the Climate Act costing just 1% of GDP per annum. Now, I very much doubt that's true, but the point is that for the last two great national emergencies that the UK has faced, or the US for that matter, when it was really acknowledged to be an emergency, well, this is the proportion of public spending used by government. And the peaks, of course, of the First and Second World Wars. This is for the UK, this is for the US. And of course that essentially represents money spent on the wars, or the money spent on the national emergency. You're looking like 30 or 40% of GDP. That's what dealing with a real emergency looks like. That's what we should be doing and could be doing about climate change. And you can, I don't need to begin to tell you what kind of a political change of attitude that means. But if you're talking about how you deal with this sort of horrendous science that you've probably got a very sort of smattering of in your mind, unless you know a lot about it already, because I haven't been able to go into that much depth. That is what could be done. Climate politics in the UK, I would argue, almost all the current controversies around climate change, including whether we reach our targets in the climate, are near irrelevant given the actual scale of the crisis. Except insofar as not to engage in those political battles would be like giving up. So, you have to engage in those battles. I certainly wouldn't deny that. But the problem is that all the political controversies focus on level of response way below what is actually needed. And this gives a false impression to the public of what the actual scale of the problem is. That's the problem. NGOs are focused on what they can pragmatically achieve, understandably enough within the current politics, but not on what the science says we need to achieve. So everybody is drifting into a kind of unreal world. That's the problem. Now, so what do you do about it? You shout help. That's us shouting help, hoping that some God will see it. And you can take the message of emergency to the government, in this case Ed Miliband, climate emergency, red letter. Couldn't fail, could it? Or even take it to Parliament, climate emergency, do something now. Emergency sounds a little scary. How about a positive and visionary way of putting the same thing? Well, that is a target, 0 carbon by 2030. Green Party policy, 90% reductions by 2030. That's much more than the NGOs are saying, at least in any loud and vocal way. At least that is making a demand that is sufficiently beyond where the politics is to carry the message that we need a paradigm shift in where the politics is. That's really the point of it. And so, that's us in Hyde Park saying the same thing, 0 by 2030 in 2010. That snow is more evidence of that cold winter in December 2010. However, just shouting climate emergency is pretty meaningless unless accompanied by concrete demands, which is really what I've already said in terms of 0 carbon by 2030. Such demands may not be politically achievable in the short term. They need to reflect the true scale of the problem. They may not be achievable, but they might serve as a focus for a growing movement, mass mobilisation, and so on. Rather than trying to mobilise around disempoweringly small incremental changes or the little battles that we have to win. We don't ignore those, but maybe we could do that the other thing at the same time. And we need something, simple message like ban the bomb, don't we? It's so difficult in climate change because there's nothing that you know, what do you say? And there's nothing as good as that, sadly, for climate change. But it should reflect the true scale of the problem. So we've tried with our emergency demands, and this is what they are: 0 carbon by 2030, 10% emission cuts per year. That's what the Tyndall Centre says, more or less. 1 million climate jobs would be a better phrase within a year. And these two, I could easily have chosen something, we could easily have chosen something else, but we wanted something to make it concrete, to say to government, you need to do some rather unpopular things, you know, to be real. Ban domestic flights, the speed limit 55 miles an hour, you know. And these are all actually in the EDM, 303. So that's it, I won't read out, but they're all in there. And those are the MPs, real MPs have signed up to that. It's outrageously radical in terms of current politics, but MPs have signed up to it. Those are the ones currently signed up. And more have signed in the past, actually 69 MPs before the last election. So I'm not sure that all those MPs really appreciated what they were signing, actually, but they did. So we ought to have made more of it than we could. So what we're saying to do, and this is our climate emergency campaign, and this is the EDM, this is the postcard for it to send to your MP. Lobby your MP. If your MP won't sign, find a way of showing your disgust. In other words, you know, there's more that you can do. And the other thing we want to do is organise a parliamentary lobby in June next year. The idea is to get just a little bit of traction, profile, for these off the political map demands, because if we could get that, and I don't know that we will, frankly, but if we could, that would put the whole politics in a bit of a different perspective, because that's what's needed. The denier brigade, the bad guys, keep dragging the agenda the wrong way, you know, by enormous falsehoods. We need to push it back the right way by telling more of the truth, frankly, and by having demands that fit the scale of the problem, and that's what that's the aim. So that's what we're suggesting. And yes, big demonstrations, of course, always put those people who understand it, concentrate them all together and make it look that, you know. So that's it. The rest of this is really just what we're actually doing for the demonstration this year in December. And that is dealing with, unfortunately, what's actually happening. And as signals from natural world rise to a crescendo, response from humanity is more insanity. Extreme energy. We're going to be campaigning around that this December, so this is a little advert for the demo. But tar sands, Keystone Pipeline. We're going to build a Keystone Pipeline in Grosvenor Square for Canadian High Commission to the US Embassy. There may be another reason for being at the US Embassy, because we've not only got extreme energy, we've got extreme politics. Today the Tea Party, tomorrow Madness. And if they win, we want to be making a statement about that. And in fact, everybody around the world needs to make that statement, I think, if they get it. But for the UK, this is the visible face of going in completely the wrong direction vis-a-vis climate change. With unconventional fossil fuels, Don't Frack My Future, that's from Lancashire. We organised Camp Frack last year. And this feeds into, politically, the dash for gas from Osborne and co. That's what they're planning, that's what they want. It's going to kill the Climate Act because it's a little bit complicated, but basically that much gas is not compatible with our targets, even with the Climate Act, inadequate as I've already said they are. So fracking does feed into the wider politics in the UK. So we want to build a fracking rig outside Parliament. You know, these guys want to frack, but they're aware there will be opposition. We want to say to them, you dare, there will be massive opposition. That's the point of that, to build a fracking rig outside Parliament. So that's what we want to do. But as I say, the climate emergency thing is more the long-term aim that we're after. So that's get fractious on the 1st of December. And there are other things you can do, and that we will probably need to do, frankly, to get the message over. This is 10% annual cuts, climate emergency, and this is an act of civil disobedience. And you may notice that on Buckingham Palace. And we also had a quote from Prince Charles that we put up there, which went very well with the media because they couldn't trash us without trashing Prince Charles as well. But the point I want to make is that 4 people did that. If that had been 100 people, it would have had an impact. And this is probably the time for this kind of thing to happen. When you've seen what we're up against and how little is being done, well, that's one way forward, and that's where I'm going to conclude. There's the website for that. And I'm probably too late, so over to Brian for...
Thank you very much. Right, well, I'm very conscious that we want to leave a good time for discussion, and that, if I may